Today's episode is brought to you by Sports Business Classroom. Landing a job in the NBA is no easy feat. One surefire way to put yourself in front of a competitive talent pool is if you master the collective bargaining agreement. And now you can, with a course developed by the godfather of the CBA himself, Larry Kuhn. Larry Kuhn has been teaching the CBA to teams, agents, media, and students for over 20 years, and now you can master the CBA through his online video on-demand course, which is now available to the public. If you're looking to break into basketball or even just set yourself apart, this is the competitive advantage you are looking for. To learn more about the video on-demand course that is being taken by teams and agents all over the world, please visit sportsbusinessclassroom.com today. Welcome to the No Trade Clause podcast, episode number 25. I'm joined here by Aaron Washington, and we're going to walk you guys through just a lot of the cool things happening with this NBA season as we wind down. These are kind of the dog days of the season, if you will. We're going to unpack this, make this a lot of fun, thinking about just all these cool storylines as we wind down to not just an exciting playoff race, but also a really cool play-in tournament. It's going to be a lot of fun. And if last year's any indication, especially with this year, the way the standings are so tight, this year's going to be even better. So, Aaron, just what are you really thinking about some of these teams and what's really exciting you about the end of the season?
The playoff race is always a fun time, John. Just looking over these teams that are A, at the top of the rankings, and then B, kind of straddling the line between being a playoff team or non-playoff team. That's always fun. I know for myself, I'm still trying to recover from some recent Heat losses here. So I know for myself as a fan, it's been a little bit of a rocky time recently, but there's another game tonight, and that's the great thing about the NBA. If your team is struggling, you're going through some tough times, there's another game right around the corner to try to right the wrong. So excited to be back on here with you, John. It's been a minute, but excited to get into these storylines and check out what teams are kind of trending up and trending down. And we're going to get into some pretty hot teams here recently that have been doing some crazy things over the past few weeks. So excited to highlight them and give them their kind of their highlighted the things they're doing really well so far recently. So let's get into it.
Definitely. And we're not really big on this whole play on words thing, but it kind of just happens naturally. And when you're talking about teams that are red hot, nothing really does it like the Suns, right? So thinking about a team, you were talking about how a lot of teams, right, in the NBA, the great thing is like 82 games, there's a lot of chances to make up for things. The Suns haven't really needed that because they're just winning games left and right. Like they're just really steamrolling the competition, whether it's good teams, bad teams, they're handling business. They're really setting themselves apart, like already clinching. They've clinched the playoffs a long time ago. They're clinching the 1 seed. Like they're doing all these things to solidify themselves as a great team. Maybe it's because of the market. People aren't really seeing them like that. I mean, they're like a lot of people are picking other teams to win the championship. When it comes to the regular season, the Suns have really made the claim of, hey, we're the best team in basketball. So I'm curious what you think about that, because the numbers and everything else point to the Suns being the favorite, but not everyone's looking at them like that, and maybe they should be.
Yeah, John, just thinking about why some people aren't really giving them the best chance to win a championship. Maybe it's because of the whole Chris Paul narrative. I talked to some of my friends that watch a lot of NBA, and they go back and they give Chris Paul a lot of flack for his previous playoff appearances. Not necessarily that he plays poorly in the playoffs, but that he always seems to suffer an injury of some kind. You go back to last season, you look at how he performed. I mean, he performed very well, but he wasn't 100%. He was limited. And listening to the JJ Redick podcast recently, I mean, Chris Paul was saying that there were times when he first sustained the injury and he was trying to make his way back into the lineup, that he can barely shoot the basketball. He was trying to get his arm above his head to actually shoot the basketball, and even that was a difficult process for him. And then you go back a few weeks ago and he sustained, I believe it was a thumb injury, which kept him out until just a couple of days ago. So with Chris Paul, you never know. He's almost like a ticking time bomb, to put it plainly, when it comes to his body and how it holds up over time. So hopefully that big injury that he always seems to suffer during the season, hopefully that's behind him now. He took care of that previously, and now for the playoff push, he's 100%, and the team as a whole is 100%. That's really what I want to see from them. I want to see a Suns team that's complete, that's whole, that has a legitimate chance to show what they can do in the postseason with everybody 100%. So as of today, John, I mean, they're 16-14. You can't really hit on the record. You can't hate on their stats within the league. Number 2 offense, number 3 defense overall, number 1 in point differential at 9.5. 11-4 is their record without CP3. So when he went down right before they came back from the All-Star break, Devin Booker had to assume the reins of the offense, and he performed very well. 28 points a game, 4 boards, 7 assists. and his shooting splits were almost 50-40-90. He was at 89% from a free throw line, but other than that, I mean, he was super efficient. So they performed well without CP3. They're still doing well. They're on I believe, a 6-game winning streak as of today. The only blemish for them right now is Cam Johnson is out indefinitely with the knee injury, which is pretty disappointing to see. But I mean, overall, their lineup is super balanced. They're super deep. They get production from their 8th, 9th, 10th man on the roster, and they're just a cohesive unit. They're all on the same page. So kudos to that team. Kudos to the coaching staff. Monty Williams is probably going to win Coach of the Year. He should have last year, but that's a whole different conversation. So the whole team is a lot of fun to watch, and I don't see any reason why they're not going to keep rolling and march right back to the finals where they have a great chance to kind of right the wrongs from last season.
Yeah, a lot of crazy things happened last year with the awards and some Knicks winning it. Tom Thibodeau, a couple other instances like that.
That didn't age well at all.
That did not. That aged terribly, by all estimates. But that being said, in terms of the Suns, I mean, you hit the nail on the head because they really are for real. And it's crazy. I mean, it's things that have been like Jazz were kind of like that last year. Teams that maybe we haven't really seen on that stage before until recently. So like the Jazz really weren't that kind of perennial contender until last year. The Suns last year were, and obviously in the finals, but we never really saw them before that ever. So it's kind of like, oh, like this is a new team to be in the mix. Like we're used to Milwaukee and all these teams for the last 4 or 5 years. Like where did this team come from? But they're really putting the whole league on notice. They're putting up the numbers throughout the whole league, whether it's number 2 offense, whatever it is. They're doing that, and they need to get their respect because they're gonna go into the playoffs. I think on a really hot streak. Whoever they play, like comes out of the playing game at number 8, and we're gonna talk about that. The reward for you getting the 8th seed and finally making the playoffs is playing a team with 60+ wins. So
that's right.
It's been doing it all year long. So that's going to be fascinating to see. But moving over, there's another team in the East that is still playing. Maybe played even better than the Suns since the turn of the calendar year, but they didn't really start that hot. But they're really doing it when it matters, and that's the Boston Celtics. They've been on another level when it comes to just really raising their play now the season's over. They're winning 20 of their last 24 games, the best defense in the league, the best point differential in the East. I mean, just across the board, they're putting up these stats that you look at and you're like, wow, they have a legit shot now being almost a half a game behind the 1 seed in the East, from a team that almost was within the same spot the Knicks were in, like back in November, December, like not even in the play-in, if that. So they've really turned their season around. I mean, what have you seen from them? They have the stats to back it up. They have the caliber players that have maybe even when they were younger had that playoff experience, making it to the conference finals, making it to the semifinals. I mean, this team looks like a real serious threat to come out of the East.
100%, John. Ime Udoka, their head coach, deserves a lot of credit. The players deserve a ton of credit. Everybody has just bought into what they're trying to accomplish, particularly on defense. That's what really just stands out to me about this team, what makes them so elite. Just watching a few Celtics games over the few weeks, and you can see how connected they are together when it comes to the defensive end. Communication is on point. They have size, they have length, they have athleticism on that end. Robert Williams has had a mini breakout season. I think he deserves a lot of credit for what they're doing on defense. He anchors that paint better than almost anybody in the league. He has a crazy wingspan, and he's just such an intimidating presence to the point that people really think twice before they try to drive the lane on the Celtics. So he's been amazing. As you said, they've been very good. The record over the past 2 months has been as good as anybody, even the Suns we just finished talking about, 20-6 since January 10th, 12th in offense, first in defense for the whole season. But if we narrow down the sample and we only look at the past 2 weeks, they're number 2 in offense in the first rated defense. So they're almost number 1 in both statistics over the past 2 weeks, which is absolutely incredible. And, Tatum deserves a lot of credit too. I've seen him rising the ranks of the MVP order so far. And it's warranted. 32 points a game since the All-Star break, 50-40, the same deal as Booker, almost 90% from the free throw line, about 89%. So basically 50-40-90 since the All-Star break. And I don't know how many people have been talking about this, but one major difference of this Celtics team as compared to past Celtics teams, let's say over the past 3 years or so, is there isn't a lot of ego and kind of jostling for position that I saw before. There's no Tatum and Brown trying to go with Kyrie to see who's the number one option. Al Horford was still, closer to his peak back then. So there was kind of like a jostling for position. Gordon Hayward, it was like, am I 1? Am I 2? Am I 3? That's all gone. It's just, hey, Tatum is the leader. Brown is going to come in right behind him. And then everybody else just buys in. Horford's just the nice glue guy. Williams is in the paint. Smart is smart. He never changes. He's going to give everything he's got. Even the bench has been very solid. Peyton Pritchard, deserves a lot of credit here. And then you just go down the lineup. I mean, everybody's just bought in 100%. So I think that's the biggest difference compared to past Celtics teams. And then this season in particular, Tatum is not that up and down. I'm a superstar one game. I'm a, mediocre guy the next game. He's locked in. He's killing teams every game. So that's the Celtics so far in the second half. And it's not like they're winning games by 2 points. I don't know if you watch the box scores, but it seems like every time they have a game, they win by 12, 15, 20, 25. So they're absolutely dominant. And I honestly think they have a great chance of coming out of the East with the way they've been playing. They're probably the hottest team in the league right now, and they deserve a ton of credit for their turnaround that they've made and, after the calendar flipped to 22.
It's even more than 15, 16, 12 points even. You're talking about they beat the Warriors, Nuggets, and Jazz by combined 70 points last week. That's the Jazz by 28, the Nuggets by 20, and the Warriors by 22. These are teams that we're all looking at and saying, oh, they can win the championship. And these guys are night in, night out thrashing them, absolutely wiping the floor with them. Obviously, the playoffs are a different beast, and it's a whole different ball game there. For them to be doing that in rapid succession during the regular season is pretty startling. And in their last 16 games against teams in the playoffs playing in that mix, they only lost one game out of those 16 against the Mavs, and that was about 2 weeks ago. So you're talking about going 15-1 against your last matchups against legit competition. I mean, that speaks volumes to me. That's basically you're almost basically going undefeated against teams that actually matter. So that's pretty impressive, and they're riding this wave right when it matters most. If they can keep that up for the next 2-3 weeks, and then you're looking at them having the 1 seed, they have to be looked at as the favorite coming out of the East if they can keep that up. Because even if they didn't do it all year, even if they weren't, they were a first round exit, for the last 2 years or whatever it was, they've proven over the last 4 months that they're really serious about closing the season out strong.
Absolutely. I mean, it should be a crime how bad they're beating teams across the league right now. And that should be a double crime for the caliber of the teams they're beating. So it's not just, the Thunder. It's like, okay, we expect that. But they go into games against these elite teams like the Jazz. I mean, I'm looking at the box score. I'm like, are they really just humiliating the Jazz right now by 25 points? It's like whatever it was, 70-49 or something like that, coming out of halftime. So this really impressive stuff. And that team really deserves a lot of credit for their mental fortitude, because a lot of times you'll see teams that get off to a rough start and they'll kind of mail it in and they don't really have a comeback, so to speak, after the rough start. But with the Celtics, it's been there. Their shooting has been extremely solid, and that defense just really stands out to me because there's a lot of people that put a lot of emphasis on offense, but those teams that are all the way through the roster just locked in on defense, I feel like they're kind of fewer and farther between. So that's really cool to see, and I'm excited to see how they perform in the playoffs, because it was Chicago that kind of took that role earlier in the season as, they could make a run and they're really kind of exceeding expectations, but Boston has come in and they've taken that role kind of away from Boston or away from Chicago recently. So super impressive, and let's see how far it takes them.
And what's really exciting about this entire Eastern Conference playoff picture, as you mentioned, right, those two teams, there's even more teams than that, I would argue, that are still exceeding expectations in the East. You're talking about teams like the Cavs, who maybe slipped a little recently, but that's okay. I mean, that happens. The Heat, who've been holding the number 1 seed all year long, and everyone had their doubts with them after the bubble run. It was like, okay, but they really that team, and they've shown all year that they are that team in the East, and they're still super competitive. The Sixers obviously training for Harden. The Bucks are going to do what the Bucks always do every year. You already mentioned the Bulls, and then the Raptors, after starting pretty sluggish, came alive again too. Not to the extent that the Celtics did, but they're still showing that they can be competitive too. And then obviously you have the Nets, who no one knows what's going to happen there. We can sit here and speculate, but we have no idea when Ben Simmons is playing. Now Kyrie can play home games, but still a complete up in the air. No one knows what's going to happen. That is the most fascinating. They'll be the most interesting 8 seed of all time.
100%. They can win a championship as an 8 seed. Like, imagine that.
That is crazy because you just don't know what you're going to get with them. You have no idea who's going to be on the court. You have no idea how they're going to play. You have no idea what they look like after not seeing them for a year. So there's so many moving pieces there. But if it happens, that's what makes for just really good basketball, and we'll be able to watch that in just a month or so. But really, you're talking about one game separating the Heat, Sixers, Bucks, and Celtics for the 1 seed now, and then the Cavs and Raptors are tied at 5 at right there at 6 and 7. But the Cavs can end up playing the Nets in a first round playing game, which is kind of in the fight for that 7 seed, which is pretty crazy.
Wow.
And then you have the Hawks, right? It's over there at 10, the Hornets at 9. Like those, they have like a game, 2 games in between all of them right at that point. So that might be a little bit more spaced out. But man, that 1 to 4 seed, that is going to be a dogfight. And the difference of teams, think about you have a chance of playing the Nets in the first round, or a team like the Hornets maybe in the first round. And you don't know what the Nets are going to be like. There's so many moving pieces here that in the next 2 weeks we'll get some more light on. But so much can change. These standings might be totally different next week.
They really could. I keep hearing people saying that, these teams at the top jostling for position, they're trying to avoid the 1 seed. They're trying to throw games because they don't want the 1 seed, because they don't want to play the Nets and all that stuff. I mean, they can't be worried about that. You have to kind of go out there and just let the chips fall where they may. But yeah, I mean, like what we were talking about previously with the Brooklyn, it's absolutely insane that a team of this caliber, as of today, 3 games above 500, and staring down a play-in game with Cleveland or Toronto, maybe even Chicago. More than likely they win that game. I'm anticipating them winning that game. So like, where does that put them? That puts them at the 7 seed, and then they're battling either the Celtics or the Bucks or the Sixers. Like, I think that the NBA world could implode if we get a Celtics Nets first round matchup, because either of those teams losing the first round would be absolutely insane. The Bucks, a rematch of their playoff matchup from last year. I mean, any way you slice it, the Eastern Conference is going to be it's going to be brutal to work your way through that conference. And whoever comes out of there that plays Phoenix or Golden State or whoever comes out of the West, I mean, they're going to have to earn that. There's no easy pass. There's no, I don't think there is a single way to get out of there that's going to, spare you from just a dogfight. Because even if you play Toronto, I mean, Toronto makes you work for everything. You watch their games. I watched them play Denver about a week ago, and they just dismantled Denver with their defense, their length, their communication, their toughness. So with Van Vliet, with Scotty Barnes, with OG coming back, hopefully pretty soon, all the way down the roster, I mean, they're extremely tough. So if you get caught in the first round with Toronto, I mean, it might only be 5 games, it might be 6 games, but I mean, you're going to get the best of Toronto, and that's going to beat down whoever ends up in that matchup. So there's no easy way out of the East. This isn't your Suns Eastern Conference, or the Eastern Conference that you might have seen from 5 or 10 years ago. The days of them being an inferior conference that has inferior competition, it's over, because there's 4, maybe 5 teams in that conference right now that could legitimately come out of the East and have a chance at the championship. So extremely impressive on that front. I don't want to get quite into the play-in scenarios too much quite yet. We're going to get to that in a minute, but you look at those top 4 seeds, and like you said, it's going to be a crazy fight for the last 10 games or so, as far as who's going to come out of the conference. So that's definitely worth keeping an eye on. And I'm not quite sure how the tiebreakers are going to break out between those teams or kind of shake out, but this proves that every game matters in the regular season. I mean, a random matchup between Philly and Milwaukee back in January might not seem like much, but when it comes down to it and the standings get very tight, that game that you played in January can have a huge influence on whether you finish second or third, which could have a huge influence on whether you get out of the first round or not. So everything matters, and these 4 seeds all have a great chance of winning a championship, with an 8th seed lurking in the wings.
And that is so cool to think about. I mean, we're obviously both huge basketball fans. Everyone listening to this show loves the game. I mean, there's no better time to really. I mean, there's so much excitement going on right now with what's about to transpire. And the thing that we have and we're getting all excited about the first round. There's still the semis and then the conference finals and the finals after that. I mean, and that's after March Madness, which has been great so far this week. Like, it is a great era, a great time to be a basketball fan, and I'm very excited.
Absolutely.
You mentioned right now jumping into the plane right away, but we do need, in terms of getting into it, the teams in the East are pretty interesting with that, because obviously, right, there's a team like the Nets in that mix, and they were coming this year as the favorites to win the championship almost. So
That's definitely fascinating. I'm going to take it over to the West, though, because we already spoke about the East a little bit, but the West playing with the Clippers, Lakers, Pelicans, and the Timberwolves now, who've really come alive with Carl Towns playing out of his mind. Those are the four teams that I think, we maybe the Lakers, we didn't expect them to be there. The Clippers are still keeping it together, even with Kawhi and Paul George not playing. So we'll see what happens there. But the Timberwolves, maybe many didn't see them as a playoff team. Many didn't see like that. They haven't really been that. And now they're really showing that and winning games against really good teams. And the Pelicans, we've heard a million different things about Zion and whether he's coming back and maybe he's not. And then the trade that they did to then they were in the 12th seed, I think, before the trade deadline. Now they're back up to 10 and they're in that play-in fight. So what are you really seeing there? Because there's a lot of things that should have happened or shouldn't have happened or we didn't expect, and it's happening now in the West.
So, I mean, and when it comes to the West, man, this play-in situation, very interesting to track. I went back in the standings and I took a look at who's jostling for what position. So you can basically break it down to the Nuggets and the Wolves fighting to stay out of the play-in. So they're between 6 and 7 right now. Only about a half a game separate them. You work your way down, you get to the Clippers. The Clippers are pretty much locked in because there's 7 games between them and 7. The 7 seed, and then there's about 4 games between them and 9. So they're probably going to stay where they're at. And then you look at the Lakers and Pelicans, they're fighting to stay in the playoff race, the play-in race specifically. So they're both, as of today, the Pelicans are a half game behind, and they just lost to the San Antonio Spurs here just less than an hour ago. So that changes things a little bit. So you have the Lakers in 9, Pelicans in 10, Spurs at 11, and they're only about maybe 1.5 games behind now. Since they won today behind the Lakers. So, I mean, that's very interesting. So let's just imagine for a second that the Lakers fall out of that spot. The Spurs could go on a little run if the Lakers lose a couple games in a row. The Lakers could fall out of the playoff race completely. They could be the 11th seed. So I didn't see that happening even just a couple of weeks ago. I thought the Lakers would kind of stay around 9 or 10. But as of today, that's a legitimate possibility that they could fall out. So we could talk about all these a little bit here, but that is a very fascinating piece of the puzzle because some of us, myself included, had the Lakers as maybe not a championship contender, but at least a legitimate playoff team, a team that can be in the top 5 or 6 at least. But here they are at 10, possibly 11 here, depending on how the last few games go. They're 3 and 7 in their last 10 games. Meanwhile, the Spurs are 6 and 4 over the last 10 games, so they're gaining a little bit of momentum. And I think this is a team that's out for blood. They smell blood in the water with the Lakers, stumbling over themselves again and again. DeJounte Murray, Jakob Poeltl, you go down the roster. Lonnie Walker's had some great moments recently. So that's a team they're on the prowl. They're after the Lakers. They're after the Pelicans. They're really vying for a playoff spot, even though it looked like they were kind of dead in the water there for a minute. So that is a piece of the puzzle I can't wait to watch. And if I was a Pelicans fan, I would start praying to the basketball gods that Brandon Ingram finds a way to get back soon because they need him so bad. I mean, that's the difference between being 9 or 11 if he's not there. So they need him in the worst way right now. I need him in the worst way right now because my fantasy team is just floundering right now. Don't know what to do without him. So for all of our sakes, I'm hoping that Brandon Ingram finds a way back soon. But that's a race to keep an eye on. 9 through 11, last 10 games or so. That's going to determine who is in and who is out. 2 spots, 3 teams. We'll see how that goes. But if you had to put your money on one team, John, out of those 3 teams, who do you see keeping up in the 9-10 spots, and who do you see falling out into 11, ending up on the outside looking in?
I would have to say the Lakers might be that team to fall out at this point from the way it's looking and the way that the way their whole season has gone. They could prove me wrong and really turn it on at the end. But those other 2 teams, they have young guys that want to compete, that have a little bit more to prove. The Lakers maybe don't have that as much. I think those other 2 teams might. They've been showing that they've been winning more of their recent games, but just in general, all year long, they were both in the 12-13 spot. The Lakers never really were there, and the Lakers never really fought to get into the play. They just were there from the start of the season. These teams fought to get in there. They want to be there. They want to stay. And I think they're going to do what it takes, especially with a lot of their guys being out. Now that they're back, they'll be able to make that little run. And look, maybe Laker Nation proves me wrong. I hope people aren't upset about that, the diehard Lakers fans. But it's been a rough season for you guys, and I don't think it's going to end anytime soon.
That's rough, man. I mean, I really expected more from the Lakers. Even, without Anthony Davis, I thought they can pull out a few more wins. And this is why you got to take care of business. They had that easy schedule in the beginning. They didn't capitalize and now found themselves kind of on the edge of falling out completely. But moving up for a second, you touched previously on the Nuggets and Wolves in 6 and 7. That's very fascinating because, this is the second winning season for the Timberwolves since 2004. So we're talking about almost 2 decades. They've had 2 winning seasons. So this is a big deal for the Timberwolves. Since they're here, they might as well just really push for a playoff spot. Cat has been healthy. That's awesome to see. Ant-Man's doing this thing. D'Angelo Russell's been very solid. And then the depth across the board. You look at Nas Reed, you look at Taurean Prince, you look at, Jaden McDaniels, all these guys, Jared Vanderbilt, Patrick Beverley. It's the Patrick Beverley effect, man. A lot of people don't like him. I don't know how you feel about him, but there's no denying that he's had an impact on this team. They're grittier. They're willing to get down and dirty on defense more hustle plays, doing the little things. That wasn't present before from the Timberwolves team. So they could really climb out of the playoff or play-in scenario. They could end up 6, and then they end up playing maybe Golden State in the first round. That'd be a very intriguing matchup. So I'm rooting for them. Nothing against Denver. I love Denver as well. But if Minnesota can really, stamp their way into the playoffs without having to go through the play-in, that's very exciting. I want to see Cat in the playoffs. I want to see Anthony Edwards in the playoffs. That's going to be some fireworks for sure. So my money is on them to take the 6th spot. But of course, with Jokic with Denver, there's no telling what they could do. They could rattle off 3-4 games in a row of wins because he's just that good on his own. So that's another one to keep an eye on. Whoever falls out of 6 is going to have to play the Clippers. And honestly, I think either one of those teams beat the Clippers in a game. And, the Clippers have lost 5 games in a row as of today. They don't have much of an offensive flow without PG or Kawhi. They kind of just rely on just the doing the little things, getting down on defense. They're an okay team, but I don't see them making the playoffs, honestly, just the way the roster is constructed. But how do you feel about those teams there in that mix, trying to stay out of the play-in and possibly be 6-7 seed there in that situation?
It's fascinating because there's such a big difference between being the 6th and the 7th seed. If you're the 6th seed, you feel a lot better about yourself going to the playoffs. And if you're the 7th seed, now you have to fight for that 7th spot, number 1. And number 2, you're looking at a team like the Grizzlies in the first round. Or let's say you end up losing, and you end up getting the 8th seed because of the play-in tournament. Now you're playing the Suns, who we sang their praises all at the start of the show. So there's a big difference there in terms of where you are between 6 and 7, and in terms of how your playoff fortunes might turn out for you. In terms of which one of those 2 teams can do it, I would have, with the Nuggets getting guys back, I would have to think that they're pretty. They have a pretty good chance of keeping themselves afloat. They obviously have the advantage now in the standings, and I can't see them losing that many games to lose it with the guys they're getting back, with the confidence they have going to the end of the season, and the fact they likely have the MVP of the league on their team. So that's definitely going to be interesting to see how that plays out, and we'll see if they're able to capitalize on that, or maybe the Timberwolves can surprise us again. Like you said, Patrick Beverley really has that mentality instilled in them. That might be enough to put them over the top and have them finish the year stronger than they started it. Because at the start of the season, they weren't there. So for them to now have been won all these games recently and put themselves in a spot to do that, they might be hungry enough. They have some dogs over there in Minnesota on top of some Wolves.
That's the Wolves, man.
They might be able to make it happen.
Wolves on the hunt. I love it. Yeah, I think the big tipping point for Denver, what's going to make a huge difference, is whether or not they get those guys back. Before, I think about 2 or 3 weeks ago, the signs were pointing to them making a return. We thought they're going to be getting back just in time for the playoffs. Now Malone and those guys are saying they may not be back. We're not quite sure yet. Jamal Murray is still, I think, a little bit farther behind is what I'm hearing than Michael Porter. So, even if they get one of those guys back, that's a huge boost. But I was just assuming that both of those guys are still absent for the last 10 games or so. So if they're both still out, I want to take the Timberwolves. But of course, if somebody makes a return, that changes the equation a little bit. So as a lot of things do in the league, it comes down to health. But, I do work with somebody that's a Timberwolves fan. So maybe that's another part of it. I'm just really rooting for him because he's a Wolves fan. He's gone through his years of misery. So maybe they could be the Suns of last year, where they're just so bad for so many years, and they finally break through and they kind of shed that just that ugly little stigma they had on themselves, just being a weak team or just being a mediocre team, a subpar team. This could be the year to really kind of change their fortunes, change their reputation. So I rooting big time for Minnesota. But either way, I mean, the Western Conference playoffs are sure to be exciting as well because, it's a little more open than it would be than if Denver had all their guys and the Clippers had all their guys. Those teams being less potent than usual opens the door for, definitely Phoenix, but of course maybe Golden State or even Memphis to make a run. So that's going to be worth keeping an eye on for sure.
It's funny. We've been talking so much about what we think is going to go down at the end of the season. One thing I know for sure, right, all these predictions we're making is that this playoff picture will look very different the next time we look at it this time next week. So for all your salary cap needs, all your NBA needs, check out our website down below. It'll be in the description. It's down here on the bottom of the ticker, notradeclause.com. We have all our cap sheets, whether it's all this NBA news, all the episodes we're going to make here on the No Trade Clause podcast with Aaron and myself. That'll have you more than prepared for the next time you're kind of breaking these standings down, the next time you're breaking down these cap sheets and thinking about yourself. What does this all really mean? What does this big picture of the NBA really look like? We got you covered over at NTC. And Aaron, this was a fun episode kind of going through. I mean, it's been a while since we've been on this, and we're going to be coming at you guys more next week and the week after. But stay tuned as the season ends because there's some good stuff coming up.
100%. Couldn't say it better myself, John. It's a great time as always, jumping on the mic with you and discussing the league. And, for you guys that, may be watching this for the first time or listening to us for the first time, this No Trade Clause brand was born out of an experience that we both had at Sports Business Classroom. And, it's actually coming up again here really fast, faster than I actually thought. Here in July, out in Summer League, they host a program, Business of Basketball, that we both encourage all you guys to check out if you have any interest at all in getting into the league, getting into sports, really want to just kind of get your foot in the door. So they have a website, sportsbusinessclassroom.com. We highly recommend that you guys at least take a look if you're at all interested. And, that's where we meet a lot of great people, and you could do the same and kind of forward your career if you're looking to kind of make your way in that field. So definitely check that out. And then, of course, we have all our social media platforms. If you're watching us on YouTube, we have that all on the screen here. We're going to have that in the description if you're watching on your streaming platforms or listening on streaming platforms. So we have that all available for you guys. Graphics, I do the draft capital. We have a transaction log. All that stuff is there. So be sure to check us out. And as John said, we'll be back here in the very near future with some more guests and some more features coming your way. So be sure to stay tuned on that. And we look forward to seeing you guys on the next installment of the No Trade Clause podcast. So have a great rest of your day and enjoy this NBA season. We'll see you back here real soon.